A U.S. climate envoy John Kerry has arrived in Shanghai to discuss climate change with his Chinese counterpart Xie Zhenhua. And Kerry's visit comes ahead of a U.S. President Joe Biden's virtual climate summit next week. At the time, Biden is likely to outline the U.S. goals for cutting emissions by 2030. Last year, then-President Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, but Biden rejoined it in February. Kerry is the first official in the new administration to visit China. He will also visit South Korea this time. And our reporter Xu Mengqi is joining us from Shanghai. Hello there, Mengqi. Well, this is the first visit to China by a Biden administration official. So what can we expect from the climate talks?
Well, Dongning, behind me is the Dongjiao State Guest Hotel where the talks are taking place now. All morning we've been seeing vehicles in and out, and actually there are quite a lot of media outlets around. So interest is high in these talks. And given the fact that Kerry is the first Biden administration official to visit China, there's been a lot of speculations as to whether the two sides will actually talk about issues beyond climate change. But that is something we can only wait and see. So far, we know that Kerry is in Shanghai at the invitation of China's Ministry of Ecology and Environment. And according to an official statement released by U.S. State Department, the climate envoy is here to discuss raising global climate ambitions ahead of the U.S. President Joe Biden's leaders summit on climate next week. Now, China has yet to confirm its participation at the summit, so very likely something the two sides will talk about this time.
Now, for more on the climate change cooperation between the two countries, we now have reporter Dai Kai in the studio. Kai, well, first of all, give us a general picture of the status quo of carbon dioxide emissions in both China and the U.S.
Well, Dongning, China and the United States are by far two of the biggest carbon dioxide emitters in the world. And in 2019, China released 10 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide, and the U.S. released 5 billion. And China is the largest producer of carbon dioxide emissions, but its cumulative emissions are considerably less than the United States. The U.S. has emitted more than 400 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And this makes the U.S. the biggest contributor to global carbon dioxide emissions by far. And it's produced almost twice the amount as the second biggest emitter, China. And the U.S. shows disproportionately high levels of emissions per capita. In 2018, the carbon dioxide emissions per capita in the U.S. stood at 15 metric tons. And in China, it was 6.8 metric tons.
Right, and how have the two countries, China and U.S., been cooperating on the issue of climate change over the past 2 decades?
Well, as early as 2009, John Kerry, then Secretary of State for the Obama administration, came to China to straighten things out before the Copenhagen climate change talks. And in April 2013, the two countries launched the U.S.-China Climate Change Working Group, chaired by Xie Zhenhua and Todd Stern, the U.S. Special Envoy for Climate Change. And the working group brought many issues to the table, like smart grid, carbon capture and storage, and heavy-duty vehicles. And just 1 year after that, the leaders of the two countries released a joint announcement on climate change. It was a resolve to address major obstacles to reaching a global climate agreement in Paris. And in 2016, China and the U.S. joined the Paris Agreement, a legally binding international treaty. And it was regarded widely as a milestone as two of the world's largest emitters signed on. And fast forward to 2021, over the phone, Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden discussed shared challenges such as global health security and climate change. Many see this as a signal that there could be more room to collaborate with regard to fighting climate change. And in March this year, top officials from the U.S. and China met in Alaska for their first face-to-face meeting since U.S. President Joe Biden took office. And cooperation on climate change was brought on table again, and the two sides decided to set up a working group.
All right, thank you very much, Dai Kai, telling us the cooperation between China and the U.S. on climate change. And now let's look at some of China's commitments and efforts in combating global warming.
China's carbon reduction goal was first outlined during President Xi's speech at the UN General Assembly last year. The country's aim is to peak carbon dioxide emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. The target is also stressed in China's 14th five-year plan for economic and social development and will be one of the nation's major tasks over the next decade. With a population of over 1.4 billion people, China is the world's biggest source of carbon dioxide, responsible for around 28% of global emissions. The carbon targets set by President Xi are seen as a significant step towards tackling climate change.
China will continue to promote sustainable development. China will fully implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It will do more on the ecological front by transforming and improving its industrial structure and energy mix at a faster pace and promoting a green, low-carbon way of life and production.
China has already made great strides in energy reform. The country released a white paper at the end of 2020 titled Energy in China's New Era. It outlines China's achievements in energy development and major policies and measures for energy reform. That includes easing access for foreign investment in coal, electricity, and new energy, and allowing both the construction and operation of facilities. Although coal still accounts for most of China's energy consumption, the country has been trying to diversify its sources of power, giving priority to clean electricity. Data shows non-fossil energy increased from 9% in 2012 to 15% in 2019. The white paper highlights China's promotion of energy industries in its pilot-free trade zones, and it says China is committed to a stable global energy market and cooperates with over 100 countries in investment and technology. China is cutting its carbon emissions, but global efforts are also needed. In his speech at Davos, Xi underscored the need to stand by the core values and basic principles of multilateralism, adapt to the changing international landscape, and respond to global challenges as they arise. He reiterated that no global problem can be solved by any country alone. With climate change as a prominent global challenge, there must be global action, global response, and global cooperation.
Now, to discuss more on this, we're now joined via Skype by Professor Guan Dabo with the Department of Earth System Science at Tsinghua University. Professor, welcome to Global Watch. John Kerry is the first senior official of a Biden administration to visit China. Well, he says the U.S. is willing to work with China to tackle global warming, but he also says the U.S. will hold China accountable for climate change. How would you interpret Washington's attitude like this?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the question. I think we are all positive to see Biden's administration have taken the U.S. back and rejoined the Paris Agreement to tackle the global climate change mitigation together with China, EU, and many other countries. And the climate change is a public good. It's like a park. You know, you go to a park every day. And it seems as no one should take a responsibility to clean the park, but actually it's all individuals' responsibility to keep it clean. Climate change is the same as a park. Climate change mitigation would require every country and everyone on the earth to make effort to it. It's not about who holds account for the issue. It's about, you know, we togetherly to make a global response and action to it. It's important to see what China and the U.S. can offer to the world collaboratively in leading the global challenge to keep the global warming below 2 degrees C or 1.5 degrees C. We can see China has made some commitments in helping other developing countries, and it's a show time for the U.S. and to see what is theirs on the table now.
Well, China is helping other developing countries, but developing countries are needing more help from the developed countries as well. At the basic countries meeting, China, South Africa, India, and Brazil all agreed that developing countries and developed countries should take different shares of responsibilities in terms of climate change, and the developed countries should fulfill their promises of funding 10 billion, 100 billion actually, 100 billion US dollars to help developing countries tackle climate change. So what's your view on that?
Well, the developed country and the current major developing countries, like you mentioned, India, China, Brazil, is what we call the BRICS countries. We all have a major economy in the world, and we have some capacities, both technologically and financially. We are able to put some on the table, maybe together with many developed countries, to help the least developing, like low-income countries, to help them transit their economy into a low-carbon ways, to help their production sectors to have a low-carbon characters on that. So the reason I'm mentioning the low-income countries, because in recent past years, like a foreseeable near future, we can see many small countries like Vietnam, Laos, Ethiopia, Zambia, many African countries, they have been having a rapid emission growth over the last decades, and possibly is gonna continue in the next couple of decades. Each individually, they don't commit, they don't account significantly in terms of a global emission, but together they are, Vietnam, Laos, Ethiopia, Zambia, many of them together, they add up to the major emitter in the world. And because their emission growth is so fast, like over 10% of every year over the last 10 years, and they will very quickly become next emission giant in the global challenge, and they would definitely jeopardize the global mitigation targets in the future. That's why we're saying we are not only providing the financially but also technologically to help them to quickly transit to a low carbon pathway. But we do understand those low-income countries, they need to develop their economy. They need some carbon space, and it's a role or it's a duty for the U.S. and China to lead the world globally to slow down decelerate their emissions, and hopefully to reduce their emissions as soon as possible.
But China and U.S., one is developed country and another is developed country, should also take different shares of efforts here to help others as well. But talking about these two giant countries and also giant emitters, in what specific areas do you think China and U.S. can cooperate on?
There's many areas they can work together, but I think there's on the same time, both China and the U.S. They actually have committed the carbon neutrality target. They are all working on the pathway to achieving such a target. There will be a great amount of technology cooperations on zero emission development between the two countries. More importantly, as I said, those countries should make those technology development to other low-income countries as well, to retrofit their production sector with the low-carbon features, transit the economy into low-carbon pathways. This is from the technology part. From the financial part, as you mentioned before, globally there should be a financial mechanism. For example, the global carbon market and some other, many sub-mechanisms from this, and to help both China, U.S., and many other developing countries to tackle the climate change. As I said, the climate change is a public good. So does the low-carbon technologies, low-carbon mechanisms. Sharing those technology freely between the two countries and to those low-income countries with appropriate capacity buildings is the starting point. It's always a starting point of a joint leadership.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Guan Dabo, with the Department of Earth System Science at Tsinghua University. Thank you very much for your insight. You're now watching Global Watch. Still ahead.